Good evening to everyone and welcome to today's session. In fact, today is a session of a day of victory rather, with the 9th and 19th rank being hijacked by our students. I hope that many of you would have narrowly missed 200th rank, 300th rank, but that is a telltale sign that shortly you are going to make it up in your next forthcoming entrance, because the next 2 months is almost every week is a battle. So to start today's discussion, let me sincerely thank our Beharampur students once more, Dr. Ratikant, Banoj and Sujit, who have painstakingly written all the questions after coming out of exam hall, and our Vizag Center and Warangal and Hyderabad students. So let us make the start of today's discussion. But before that, I like to ask you a question. How do you qualify this paper? Tough or too easy? It is too easy. What we had been discussing regularly, except 5 to 10 questions which are atypical, whatever that we had been discussing regularly are the ones which surfaced. If the paper is too easy also, we are unhappy because competition become tougher. If it is too tough also, we have a reason to feel sad. Anyway, we have a reason to feel sad. So let us make the start. Bull's eye lesion is typically seen in the case of the chloroquine toxicity and also in cone dystrophy, maculopathy, of the hydroxychloroquine associated toxic maculopathy, and the Stargardt's disease. All of them typically show the presence. In the chloroquine toxicity, is it a early or a late feature, doctor? It is a late feature. Which type of chloroquine? Hydroxychloroquine S, 100 milligrams we frequently give for the patients who are having the SLE, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. In such cases where you give for a prolonged period of time to treat the arthritis, hydroxychloroquine, they need to have a periodic ophthalmoscopic examination to identify the development of chloroquine maculopathy is what need to be remembered. Then what is this Stargardt's disease? It is the peripheral retina which is free of the lesions, and the macular area will show the hyperfluorescent plaques like areas, which is typically called the Stargardt's disease. And the cone rod dystrophy is another important condition, which is an inherited retinal dystrophy, which is involving the macula, which also shows the presence of the bull's eye lesions. I'll give you a short case history. A 21-year-old female, blurred vision, and typically she has failed in her driving license exam, and you can see the beaten bronze-like appearance which is there in the central macular area. And when the fluorescent angiography had been done, this is the typical lesion which is called the bull's eye lesion is what you are able to see, and these are very classical of chloroquine associated toxicity. Dissociative disorders. We had a great discussion about this important entity in recent AIIMS entrance discussion also. The DSM basically identifies 4 disorders as dissociative. Dissociative amnesia, depersonalization disorder, dissociative fugue, where the person will be totally forgetting about his surroundings and he will be losing the recall of his past, and he will be walking for miles together, leaving the home, is a classical example of dissociative fugue, which is one of them. And dissociative identity disorder, where there is alteration of multiple personalities within a single individual, is one of the important types of the dissociative disorder, is what need to be remembered. Now let us talk about the Alzheimer's disease. Another common and traditional question in the entrance exam. Neurofibrillary tangles, presence of the amyloid angiopathy, senile plaques. Can you tell me, doctor, what is that stain that we use for the senile plaques called as, which can be a potential question? It is typically called the Bilkowski stain, where you can see normal axons are black in color, whereas those which are affected with the Alzheimer's are the ones which show the brownish changes, is what you are able to see in this important stain. And senile plaques of the neuritic type, which show the typical apple green birefringence, is another important way to recognize. Fibrillary tangles which can be stained with this silver stain, and also a peculiar change is shown in the cells in case of Alzheimer's called as the Hiranobodies. Those vacuolated cells which you typically see are called the Hiranobodies are very important. And this gives a quick review of the neuritic plaques, neurofibrillary tangles, and I like to ask you a question. What is the composition of the neurofibrillary tangles? Why are they forming? They are nothing but the tau proteins. They are the hyperphosphorylated tau proteins which are important in the microtubular assembly. They are the ones which are precipitating to form the neurofibrillary tangles in the case of the Alzheimer's is what need to be remembered. And on fluorescence microscopy, this is the typical fluorescence microscopy which is showing the amyloid deposition. Now let's go to the next question. AA type of amyloid, AL type of amyloid, all these are the frequent types of questions. Now tell me, doctor, which type of amyloidosis is called secondary amyloidosis? It's called secondary because it has got an underlying cause. And which amyloidosis is called as the primary amyloidosis? It is the AA type of amyloidosis which is showing the serum amyloid A protein, which is a very important acute phase reactant that will be circulating in the serum bound with a high density lipoprotein which become typically deposited. And AA amyloidosis is the one which is called secondary because it is associated with a lot of chronic inflammatory conditions, that's the reason. And also associated with a lot of neoplasms. Now the question comes, what are all those conditions with which it is associated? It can be associated with rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, Crohn's, leprosy, syphilis, osteomyelitis, tuberculosis, chronic bronchiectasis, Hodgkin's disease, Castleman syndrome, etc., etc. The list is very big, life is too short. Then which are the organs which are typically involved? Kidney, liver and spleen. Now what is another common question which is going to come in our next, let us say, UPSC entrance. Which is the most common type of amyloidosis? Once more, it is the AA type which is called the secondary amyloidosis is the most common out of all is what need to be basically remembered. And which amyloidosis you see in multiple myeloma, doctor? It is the light chains. So AL type of amyloidosis is the one which is commonly seen in the case of multiple myeloma. And the recent entrance of Ames question, senile cardiac amyloidosis, which type do you come across? It is the transthyretin amyloidosis which is the one which is seen. Some of you are going to be nephrologists. Dialysis associated amyloidosis is because of what? Beta 2 microglobulin is what need to be remembered. And in Alzheimer's disease, whatever the amyloidosis you see, it is called as the beta protein amyloid, not the AL amyloid, AA amyloid as one of the options given in out of all the options. And Down syndrome also typically shows the presence of the beta protein amyloid is what need to be remembered. Then is there any relationship with the prions? Definitely. There is something called a prion protein amyloidosis which can be seen in the case of the Creutzfeldt-Jakob, Gustman-Straussler, etc., etc. is what need to be remembered. Now let us take up the next question. Popcorn calcification, where do you come across? Is popcorn calcification question is a very as frequent as popcorn. So lot of hungry radiologists. One of my friend, he was a MD general medicine. At his wedding I asked, why did you marry this radiologist? Yeah, radiologist, at least by 5 o'clock she will be at home. Anyway, I am going to be a busiest man in the world. As such, he is only a highly possible professional. But she turned out to be an interventional radiologist later on. So suddenly in the midnight there is a hemorrhagic stroke. She has to run and then do a TPI installation after doing angio. And this fellow awfully failed in his practice. So finally, at the end of the second wedding anniversary when I have gone, he is playing with the little baby, taking care, and madam is busy in doing interventional radiology. So that is the reason what I like to say is professional match fixing, because marriage also should not become a HLA matching that way. Okay. So at least there is not much to discuss about this question. I will give you 10 common questions in entrance which are associated with the kitchen, eating, and something to do with the fruits and etc., etc. So great radiologists are great cooks. Apple core lesion, where do you come across, doctor? It is the typical shouldered margins of the annular carcinoma. Then Berry aneurysm, why it is called berries look like this in the anterior communicating artery, which can lead to development of subarachnoid hemorrhage. Pear-shaped bladder, where do you come across? If there is an extensive pelvic lymphadenopathy, let us say this patient who has got a malignancy with osteoblastic secondaries involving the pelvis, a pear-shaped bladder can typically be found. Another common question in exam, where do you have lemon sign? So typically it is the abnormal shape and the flattening of the frontal bones creating that lemon shaped appearance whenever you happen to do, in a case of myelomeningocele or a neural tube defect, ultrasound antenatally, if you happen to see prenatally, then lemon sign will be found. Then what is banana sign? Once more, in the neural tube defect, the cerebellum typically, which is being compressed because of the neural tube defect, will give that typical banana appearance. Then onion skin peel like appearance in the case of the Ewing's is known to all of you. And in the case of the sarcoidosis, there can be a sausage shape of the digits. So sausage is like this. So sausage shaped digits are very classical. And where do you have eggshell calcification? Another common question. Once more, it is in the case of the sarcoidosis, silicosis, you can come across a eggshell kind of calcification. Rice grain type of calcification, where do you come across? In the case of the cysticercosis, the presence of all these oval calcifications is called rice grain. Then why the TB is called miliary tuberculosis? They are very small, uniform in size, just like the millet seeds in the case of the miliary tuberculosis. And this can be a miliary shadowing, which also can occur in the case of the sarcoidosis, is what you are able to see here. Then there is a very important sign called as the cottage loaf sign. So where do you come across? Whenever there is any road traffic accident, there can be a herniation of the liver. You can see that these are the two kidneys and the liver is getting herniated, and radiologist was actually thinking about that cottage loaf is a typical sign of the herniation of the subdiaphragmatic contents into the thoracic cavity is what need to be remembered. Donut sign on ultrasound, where do you come across? Whenever there is any colonic malignancy, there is a circumferential thickening of the intestine, which is typically having the donut appearance is what need to be remembered. And you can also see on the abdominal CT the presence of the donuts is a very important feature. And there is another donut sign in the case of the testis. Whenever there is a testicular torsion, then that can lead to development of a decreased perfusion. If you happen to do a pertechnate scan, then it will show the presence of this kind of a decreased perfusion with hyperemia around, which is called as the donut sign of the testicular torsion. And finally we have the popcorn calcification. Is it a sign of benignity or malignancy, doctor? It is a classical sign, traditional sign of benignity. If popcorn type of calcification is there, you are happy that it is not malignancy, rather it is a hematoma. You can see the presence of the popcorn, and hematoma can lead to development of recurrent hemoptysis is what need to be remembered. Now where else do you have this popcorn calcification? Even in the case of the breast, you can see the fibroadenoma, which is typically showing a circumscribed lobulated mass with an eccentric popcorn calcification, which is a very important feature. Then there is a very peculiar feature in psoriatic arthropathy, where there can be almost a eaten appearance can be there. So a liquid candy stick appearance is what you see with those tapering phalanges in the case of the psoriatic arthropathy is what need to be remembered. Finally, French toast and honey. You need to remember honeycomb appearance because of that interstitial pathology in case of the interstitial lung disease. And finally, champagne bottle like appearance of the pelvis. Where do you come across? You can see this is a narrow champagne bottle. So this is the champagne bottle appearance in achondroplasia. The pelvis will typically have, and dinner fork deformity is the Colles fracture. So, and salt and pepper like appearance in the case of the skull in the case of the hyperparathyroidism, and the coffee bean sign with all that volvulus which is distended with a central fissure like appearance of the coffee bean sign in the case of the sigmoid volvulus is what we have to finally remember about eating and radiology. Let us go to the next question. What is kleptomania, doctor? Kleptomania is basically that impulsive disorder, compulsive gambling, pyromania where the people get pleasure to watch somebody burning or something burning. They are all examples of irresistible impulsive disorders is what need to be remembered. How do you define drug dependence is an important and a challenging question. How many of you have actually taken the PGI entrance, doctor? Good. I mean, if we have not taken PGI entrance, to review the questions is a very simple job. Really, we don't have that psychological, we are not working on the questions. But in exam hall, it can lead to a lot of, you will have a lot of internal argument. Now, this is one such question. The withdrawal symptoms, are they required for you to diagnose or define it as a drug dependence or not? Presence of tolerance, is it required to define the drug dependence or not? Is an important question. Can a person can have drug dependence without tolerance and tolerance without drug dependence? Both of them are very much possible. But there is a World Health Organization has given certain definition before you call it as the drug dependence. Number one, increased tolerance, repeated withdrawal symptom, compulsion for the drug, and also the relief of the withdrawal symptoms after intake of the drug. So these are all the important components in the definition given by the WHO. Otherwise, there can be dependence without withdrawal and withdrawal without dependence are very much possible. That's the reason the correct answer could be withdrawal symptoms, tolerance, cannot live in spite of knowing the hazards and taking it daily. They all become the components of the WHO definition of what is called as the drug dependence. Now let's go to the next question. Hypocomplementemia is a feature of immune complex mediated glomerulonephritis. So that suffices our logic. Any question paper without glomerulonephritis, vasculitis, JVP, there is no paper at all. So we must be doubly sure, doctor. Which are those glomerulonephritis which are called immune complex mediated glomerulonephritis, doctor? We have post-streptococcal, infection associated glomerulonephritis, membranous, minimal change glomerulonephritis, mesangiocapillary IgA deposit, SLE glomerulonephritis. They are all considered to be basically immune complex mediated glomerulonephritis. Now the question comes. The membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis MPGN is having two varieties, MPGN type 1 and MPGN type 2. The common question asked in the entrance is, how will be the complement profile in these two types of MPGN, type 1 and type 2? Let us closely look into it. In MPGN type 1, the immune complexes are deposited in the mesangium and in the subendothelial area. C3 levels are typically low, and most important, it is the classical component complement pathway. Those components are the ones, that is C4, C2, C1q, B and C3. They all become deficient in the case of, low in the case of MPGN type 1, and even the terminal complement components, that is the C3, C5, C8 and C9, they also become low is what I like to underscore to all of you. Whereas if you take the MPGN of the type 2, the early and terminal components will not be affected. They will be within the normal range. That is the fundamental difference between type 1 and that of the type 2 is what we have to clearly understand. Then what is the other name which is given for the MPGN type 2, doctor? It is also called dense deposit disease is what need to be remembered. And you don't find any circulating immune complexes in the case of the MPGN type 2 is what you need to finally remember. Now quickly summarize, doctor, what are the options which will show hypocomplementemia out of the ones given? PSGN will show, MPGN will show, infective endocarditis will show. Now comes, will membranous glomerulonephritis, does it show? Generally membranous glomerulonephritis that presents with nephrotic syndrome does not show hypocomplementemia except in two cases. What are those two special situations, doctor? When the membranous glomerulonephritis is because of the hepatitis B infection, or whenever it is because of the lupus nephritis as the underlying secondary cause, only in that scenario you come across a low complement, but per se membranous nephropathy does not show the low complement is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now let's go to the next question. Lot of questions come on the oncology and the cancer drugs we must be sure about. Which drugs inhibit the DNA replication but they don't get incorporated into the DNA? Now let us take each of the options given. Doxorubicin, which is also called as the adriamycin, is the anthracycline derivative. It will be intercalating with the DNA like this, and it will be interfering with the replication and unwinding of the DNA. That is how the mechanism of action of the doxorubicin. Then how does paclitaxel will be functioning? It has nothing to do with the DNA replication as such. Basically it is a mitotic inhibitor which is commonly used in the lung cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, Kaposi, etc., etc. It will be interfering with the normal formation of the microtubules, which is the underlying mechanism of action. That's the reason that does not actually intercalate with DNA, nor it doesn't affect the DNA synthesis at all, is what has to be remembered. And also paclitaxel will cause induction of apoptosis. That is another important anti-oncogenic function of it. Then you have the nalidixic acid. It will be reversibly binding with the DNA, and it will be interfering with the synthesis of the RNA, and it forms not a irreversible but a reversible complex with the DNA gyrase, just like any other what is the general group of drugs to which nalidixic acid belongs to, doctor? Norfloxacin, etc., ufloxacin, nalidixic acid, they are all called fluoroquinolones. So it belongs to that group of fluoroquinolones. So it will typically cause DNA gyrase inhibition, but its binding with the DNA gyrase is a reversible, not a irreversible binding, is what we have to finally appreciate. Now let us go to the next question. Viable but not cultivable is the term which is typically given for the Mycobacterium leprosy. And are there any other species which also get that name? Even enterotoxigenic E. coli also can become VNC. Vibrio cholerae, some species also can typically become viable but not cultivable. VNCs is what has to be basically remembered. Let us talk about the rickettsial diseases, our old friend. Very traditional paper. There is not much to discuss because we discussed all this very repetitively. So rickettsia is the one which is responsible for the Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Leptospirosis is the one caused by Leptospira, not by rickettsia. Lyme disease is by the Borrelia burgdorferi. Erythema repens is the typical lesion that you come across. Scrub typhus was one of the options given. It is definitely rickettsial, which is caused by Rickettsia sushigomoshi is the one which is responsible, which is obligate intracellular gram-negative bacterium is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now let us talk about the Pontiac fever. What is the difference between Legionnaire's disease and Pontiac fever, doctor? The non-pneumonic form of the Legionnaire's is also called Pontiac. Generally Legionellosis, how does it present? It presents like pneumonia as the presenting feature. Non-pneumonic form of it is basically called as the Pontiac fever, which is caused by the Legionella, which is the poorly staining, obligate, aerobic, gram-negative bacillus is what I like to underscore to all of you. The organisms detected in the last decade from 2007 December, that is before 1997 December, okay. So what are those organisms? Have you heard of metapneumovirus? SARS, all of us heard of it. Even papers were talking about it. Then what is this metapneumovirus? In 2001, it was Van den Hoogen is the one who discovered it. Okay, I like to ask you a much simpler question. Most common cause for the bronchiolitis in the newborn and in the children is RSV. So there are 3 more species identified which also can cause bronchiolitis. That is the parainfluenza virus type 1 and also the human parainfluenza virus type 3 and also the human metapneumovirus is the one which typically causes one of the common emerging infections leading to the epidemic form of bronchiolitis in the children is what need to be remembered. Then the other option given by the Nipah virus. What is Nipah virus, doctor? It is also another emerging infection which is typically characterized because it has got a very large genome, and it was discovered in 1994, and the index case was actually a animal, pregnant mare was the one, and in 1999 it is responsible for respiratory disease in the pig farms which were happening in Malaysia and all is what need to be remembered. But you need to remember Harry Potter and Tales and this disease. Why? Because the transmitting agent and a natural reservoir of this Nipah virus is a Malayan flying fox, Pteropus vampirus, that's the reason. Then how about the prions? Prions are not discovered in the last decade. 1957 only they found that cannibalism is the one which is responsible for the transmission of it is what need to be remembered. And there is a pandemic, now let us talk about SARS. We have seen the pandemic of the SARS happening between November 2002 and July 2003 is the time is what need to be remembered. In fact, when SARS pandemic was there, I was in my MD second year. So even tuberculosis patient comes, we were thinking that, oh, maybe SARS. And you get a sneeze also, you think maybe I am having SARS. That's how the epidemics basically make the people become unduly frightened about, right? Now, heat rupture versus incised wound. What is the difference between the two? Have you heard of heat rupture anytime? Okay, it's a common question. I think you are much more veterans in solving questions than me. So good. The point is, incised wounds are typically scalp, whereas the heat rupture is the one which is found in the right lower limb, and the left upper limb is the traditional location. So that is location wise they both basically differ from one another, but otherwise they are one of the differential diagnosis for the incised wound. They look very similar. Now radiation commonly lead to the development of leukemia, large vessel disease, large vessel vasculitis. Which one? So without reviewing the topic of vasculitis, no point in going to entrance at all is the rule, doctor. So Takayasu's arthritis and temporal arthritis are called large vessel vasculitis. I will give you my chief's favorite question in the ward rounds. It is not Takayasu belongs to which arthritis. He used to be loving one common question. What classification it is called? Chapel Hill's classification of vasculitis. So finally you cannot get out of these common names even at the end of entrance. In MD also your chief will have some favorite names. Then medium sized vasculitis, which ones? The polyarthritis nodosa, Kawasaki disease are called medium. Whereas Wegener's, Church-Strauss, microscopic polyangiitis and Henoch-Collins purpura, they are all basically called as the small sized vasculitis. Even essential cryoglobulonemic vasculitis and cutaneous leukocytoclastic vasculitis, these are all basically called as the typically called as small vessel vasculitis. Now let us take up the next question. Bleeding and thrombosis. We must quickly review 4 conditions, doctor, when we open the chapter of hematology. Hemophilia, von Willebrand disease, Bernard-Soulier and Glangerman's thrombasthenia, and all these prothrombotic states, protein C, protein S deficiency, factor V Leiden mutation, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. Where is exactly the problem happening, and also the mechanism of action of the anticoagulants, heparin and thrombolytic agents, streptokinase and urokinase. So finally, when you are in your MD first year, if your house surgeon asks you a question, what to read in hematology? Only 10 things to read in hematology and forget about it, at least in the last moment. Frequently one or the other question comes out of them. So protein C, protein S deficiency, antithrombin 3 deficiency, protein C resistance, all of them are known prothrombotic conditions. Now the question comes, dysfibrinogenemia, is it a bleeding disorder or a thrombotic disorder? What is your answer? As understood, fibrinogen is required for clot formation, hence you require basically clot is not formed. So that's the reason it is a bleeding diathesis. Same time, dysfibrinogenemia patients have a peculiar nature. If at all fibrin happen to form the multimers, it is not resistant to get fibrinolysis. I mean, it is resistant to fibrinolysis. So they also have, on the other hand, a prothrombotic state also. So how many of you have seen dysfibrinogenemia patients, doctor, in your housemanship? Typically they present with APTT will be 150 or 200. Normal APTT is around 35. They will have a prolonged PT, and they will also have factor 13 assay. I mean, fibrinogen assay, if you do, it will be abnormal. And urea clot lysis test also become abnormal in them. That is how they typically present. So they have both a bleeding diathesis because of a decreased fibrin, and they also have got a clotting diathesis because their fibrin is, once it forms polymers, it is not ready to get broken down. Both the tendencies are there in them is what need to be remembered. Now let us talk about the celiac disease, our favorite topic. Invariably question comes on celiac disease, tropical sprue, Whipple's disease. All this you must be encyclopedic, doctor. I think you are all. Now let us talk about it. Cryptitis, is it a feature of celiac disease? Though there is a mononuclear infiltrate of lymphocytes which are studying the submucosal area of a celiac disease biopsy, it doesn't qualify the term cryptitis. Cryptitis is a histopathology term applied for what? Inflammatory bowel disease patients, those who show cryptabscesses, etc. In fact, one of the histopathological criteria in the case of the celiac disease is, if at all there is a cryptitis, you should revise your diagnosis. It is unlikely to be celiac disease, is a very important rule. So submucosa muscularis and serosa are usually not involved in celiac disease. Villi definitely become atrophic, but crypts become elongated. And how do you differentiate based on the type of cells which are infiltrating the submucosal area? How do you differentiate celiac disease from that of the inflammatory bowel disease, doctor? It is the PMNs which will be infiltrating there, whereas lymphocytes are the ones which are infiltrating in the case of the celiac disease, is what need to be remembered. If at all cryptitis is there, or if cryptabscess is there, then think of an autoimmune enteropathy or think of Crohn's disease, but don't think of celiac disease is a common dictum. So you can see here, doctor, there is a blunting of the villi, and there is a hyperplasia of the crypts with a lot of intraepithelial lymphocytes which have been found. So these are the three classical histological hallmarks of the celiac disease, is what I like to underscore to all of you. Now one of the options given to us is there any superficial layer thinning in the case of celiac disease? Definitely. One of the types of celiac is called as the refractory celiac disease. Then what are the histological changes that define the refractory celiac disease, doctor? Presence of subepithelial collagen layer, presence of the mucosal thinning, and the subcryptal mononuclear inflammation, or the presence of the lymphoma, which is one of the complications of the celiac disease. If they are being detected, then the celiac is called as the refractory. So that's the reason there is also an epithelial thinning in the, as one of the histological features, is what I like to underscore. Cicatricial alopecia is a very routine repeated question we had been passing with every discussion every Sunday. Inevitably there is a topic on this, so let us talk about it anyway. There are two things, doctor. There can be a scarring, destruction of the hair follicle, which is called cicatricial, or there can be a problem in the cycle of the hair growth, telogen, etc., catagen, etc. phases it passes through. So accordingly, alopecia is broadly divided into disorders of the cycling of the hair growth, which is abnormal, which is called telogen effluvium, and those where the hair follicle is destroyed, which is called the cicatricial alopecia. So this is an example of a telogen effluvium, the short hairs frontally reflecting the new growth which is happening after the stress period is over, is an example of telogen effluvium. Whereas the damage to the scalp, for example, underlying DLE is there, discoid lupus or SLE is there, then that lead to development of cicatricial alopecia. Quickly rattle out, doctor, what are all the conditions associated with the cicatricial alopecia? Syphilis, tuberculosis, AIDS, herpes zoster, and autoimmune conditions like discoid lupus, sarcoidosis, any trauma to the scalp or radiation therapy, they are all associated with the cicatricial alopecia is what you are able to see in this slide with discoid lupus erythematosus. Whereas what are those 4 conditions which fall under the group called non-cicatricial alopecia? Androgenic alopecia, telogen effluvium, alopecia areata and trichodystrophies. They all basically fall under the category called non-cicatricial alopecia. Now let us talk about the NIDDM. Concordance rate is around 90%. That is the reason there is a familial clustering. Father has NIDDM, son has NIDDM, etc. And obese people are much more vulnerable, and familial aggregation of the cases is very much seen. In fact, concordance studies have shown that NIDDM can show concordance as high as that of 100% is what need to be remembered. Whereas IDDM will show the concordance of only 30 to 50%. Where do you find tophi in the case of the gout? It is the wrist and the metatarsophalangeal joint are the ones which are highly vulnerable. So this is the monarticular arthritis which you find in metatarsophalangeal joint, the big toe. In the case of the gouty arthritis called the podagra, and there can be a chronic subcutaneous deposition of the tophi can very much happen in the case of the gout. So this is how the bony deformities have developed with a chronic tophaceous gout. And there can also be deposition in the great toe, the fingers, the wrist, hand, olecranon bursa, Achilles tendon. But now the question comes, after the onset of the gout, how much time does it take for the gouty tophi to appear? At least 12 years should pass, not the one who has developed just yesterday or day before yesterday. Now one of the options given was, do you see the tophi in the synovium, in the cartilage, in the tendons and ligaments, etc., etc.? Very much. So this case classically depicts you. 69-year-old where the gadolinium enhanced MRI, you can see in the cartilage there is a deposition, and also in the tendons there is a deposition, and also the surrounding ligaments there is a deposition. So there is a reason there is a diffuse intra-articular deposition of the tophi. So tophi can be there in periarticular ligaments, tendons, soft tissues, olecranon, etc., etc. Even kidneys, nasal cartilages, skin, where they can lead to ulceration, palms and soles is what I like to underscore to all of you. Congenital dislocation of the hip joint is one of the traditional topics. Congenital talipes equinovarus and CDH, we must be doubly sure about. Now one of the options was, do you find floating hip in the CDH? Floating hip is not a feature of CDH, rather whenever there is a acetabular fracture along with the femoral fracture, the typical radiological appearance is called the floating hip. It is associated with the traumatic fracture of the acetabulum rather than the congenital dislocation. Now what do you see in congenital dislocation? Lumbar lordosis can become very prominent. This is the 21-month-old infant with the right hip dislocation congenitally, where asymmetric skin folds can be found, one of the options given. So looking at this kind of prominent skin fold must make you to look for the all clinical signs of possible congenital dislocation. And there is a positive Galeazzi sign whenever you happen to flex. You can see the levels are not same for both the knee joint prominences. Is typically the Galeazzi sign with the apparent femoral shortening, which you can come across in the case of the congenital dislocation. This is the breaking of the Shenton's line radiologically in the case of the congenital dislocation. Classical features is what is frequently tested. A vascular necrosis of the bone. What are the important classical locations where you come across? The surgical neck of humerus, whenever there is any fracture, there is a vascular compromise which lead to development of a vascular necrosis. Similarly, the scaphoid fracture, talar fracture and femoral neck fracture, all of them are very much associated because they have got a very vulnerable blood flow which will typically become injured. So this is the typical increased opacity of the bone on the radiological plain radiograph, because of the avascular necrosis of the talus following the fracture, is what you are able to see here. Now, one of the options given was, how about the radius lower end? What is that fracture called as? Colles. In the case of the Colles, we have other complications in Colles, not avascular necrosis. We have ulnar nerve injury, carpal tunnel syndrome, heterotopic ossification, reflex sympathetic dystrophy, tendon rupture, radial shortening, non-union. They are all the much more important and common complications is what I like to underscore.